Hey friends, what's up? College essay guy here. Sometimes people call me Ethan, every once in a while. This is my crash course in the UC personal insight questions. I paused there because I wasn't sure exactly what to call it. I've spent a lot of time thinking about the UC personal insight questions. They're near and dear to my heart, not only because I live in California and I have friends who work there, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about their essays, the personal insight questions. I'll explain to you in just a minute why we have to call them that. But the main reason that I'm excited to talk to you about them is that I feel like the UCs really have their minds and hearts in the right place when it comes to access. What do I mean by that? I'm talking about, I believe, for the most part, the school's values are aligned with their actions, and that's what I'm all about. In this guide, I'm going to talk to you about what are these personal insight question prompts? What are the UCs looking for? They're really transparent, really clear about it. How do you pick your topics? I'll give you some examples of some topics that past students have chosen. I'll talk to you a little bit about common UC topics. I'll give you 6 tips for assessing which of the prompts might be the right ones for you. And then I'm going to do a mini step-by-step guide for each one of these prompts. You'll find examples and analysis below this video. Let's get it. Heads up, this is basically the short version of my longer course, which you can find linked below this video. But it'd be really weird if I was talking to you about access and then suddenly I was like, oh, now you have to pay for this course. You do not have to pay anything for the course if you want. It's pay what you can, which means it costs $0. So you can get it for free. Really? All right, let's jump right in. So first of all, what are the UC personal insight question prompts? Now, you can tell just by calling them UC personal insight question prompts instead of essays that they're going to be a little different. And they are. That's by design. The UC folks have asked counselors like me to not use the word essay because they don't want students to think of these as like an essay that you'd write for a class, because that's not what these are about. Instead, these are questions that are specifically crafted by the University of California to try and elicit specific information with a particular goal in mind, which I'll share in just a second. First, what are the prompts? You can find them all below this video. Rather than read them all to you, let me give you the gist of each one. Number 1, you've got the leadership prompt. Number 2 is on creativity. 3 asks, what is your greatest talent or skill? 4, you have 2 options. You can talk about either a significant educational opportunity or how you've overcome an educational barrier. 5 is on significant challenges you faced on your life. In particular, how have they affected your academic achievement? UC6, the prompt is about an academic subject. The UC7 prompt is about community service activities, and I'll talk to you more about what they mean by that in a second. And UC8 is all about what makes you stand out as an applicant. And wow, I just remembered all those. That's pretty cool. That's 8 prompts, but you'll only choose 4 of these, and you can write up to 350 words for each prompt. That's really important. So what are the UCs looking for? They've put them on their website. They're called the points of comprehensive review. And rather than read them all to you, I'm just going to put them below this video, but they cover things like, did you take the hardest classes that you could? Did you challenge yourself? What are some extracurricular activities, stuff you've done outside of school, what they call special projects? So what's your goal on the UC application? I think it's 3 things. Number 1, you want to stand out in a good way from other students applying to the UCs from your school, okay? Because the UCs are comparing you to other students in your class. Number 2, you want to make sure that you show them that you've made the most of the opportunities available to you. In other words, if your school has, 6 AP classes, how many of those did you take? Did you take 4 or 5 of them, or did you only take 1? Third, and most importantly, are they connecting back to the points of comprehensive review? In other words, is the information you're giving them enough information to understand that you're the kind of candidate they're looking for based on the stuff they're looking for? Which again is on their website and linked below this video. So where do you find ideas for your personal insight question topics? Really simple. Create your UC activities list. You'll find a link below this video that's going to walk you through how to create your UC activities list. And I highly, highly suggest that either you pause the video right now and do it, or as soon as this video is done, go ahead and create your UC activities list, because that's where you're going to find your topics. I'm pausing because I'm hoping that you'll actually do this right now. Most of you probably won't, but I hope you'll remember, write it down on a little post-it, create UC activities list, because it's the best place, I think, to find your topics. All right, here's a quick list of past topics that other students have chosen, And I've just labeled them, so you can pause the video if you want. One student for prompt 1, which was on leadership, wrote about significant family responsibilities. And then prompt 2, which was on creativity, he wrote about a cappella singing. And then for 4, which was like a significant educational opportunity, he wrote about working as a teacher's assistant. And then 7, he was writing about advocating for workers' rights in his community service essay. So you can take a look at these. These aren't, they're like, oh, you should definitely write these. It's just examples to get your mind going. I mentioned earlier that I was going to give you a list of common UC topics. Here it is. These are things that students write about a whole lot, and it just gets a little bit harder to stand out with these. So if you're writing about, soccer, for example, or swimming, common sports, or you're writing about common instruments like basketball. Basketball is not an instrument. Or is it? Piano, violin. These are going to be those topics that I'm not saying if you played violin for like 12 years, don't not write about it, because that's been a tenth of your life. In a separate video, which I'll link below this, I'll talk to you about how to stand out with common topics. But if you're writing about one of these common topics, the gist of it is you're going to want to make sure you're making some uncommon connections, which is to say you're going to say some things in there that are going to surprise us. In other words, in the basketball essay, you're not going to talk about discipline, hard work, and perseverance. More on that in a separate video. You can write on these topics if you want. It just might be a little bit harder to stand out. But again, if this is what you spent your time doing, write on those topics. Having said that, there are some topics that are so common, I wouldn't recommend them for your personal insight question. The first one is the big performance essay, which basically involves someone waiting in the wings, getting ready to go on stage, and they're nervous, knees weak, arms are heavy, there's vomit on their sweater already, mom spaghetti. My friend Laura, who works at the UCs, this is her number one, I wouldn't say pet peeve, but it's the most common one that she sees. I wouldn't recommend it. You have other options for the creativity PIQ, which when I say PIQ, I mean personal insight question, which I'll share in just a second. The next is the big game personal insight question, which is we were down 3 runs in the bottom of the 9th inning, and I was up to bat, bases loaded. And then you either win the game or you lose the game, but you win in life. Related to this is the sports injury essay, where there's some moment in the game where you're running and then suddenly pop or crack or snap or something happens and you lose the season and you end up not being able to, and this happened to me, by the way, where you end up not being able to participate in sports, you become the team manager and you root for the sidelines. And I don't want to minimize your experience, because I lost my whole basketball season in 10th grade because I broke my freaking kneecap, but it's just because it's so common, students write about it so much, it's just not going to help you stand out. The fourth example is the mission trip personal insight question, where a student from relative privilege goes to a country and they meet some folks who have relatively less privilege, and they build a house, and then they learn some valuable life lesson, or they learn that they have so much to be grateful for, and it totally revamps their Instagram feed. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this because A, it's so common, and B, it basically just points at privilege. All right, that was a lot of don'ts, and I'm not a huge fan of don'ts without following it up with some do's. So here are some tips for each of the UC personal insight questions. Number 1, for the leadership one, this is a strong way to start your application. If you've got leadership that you want to show, flex that by starting your application with a strong personal insight question. And tip 2, you don't necessarily need to think about leadership in the conventional sense. Maybe you're a leader in your family, for example. If so, that counts. Don't underestimate things like that. For UC prompt 2, the creative side, you can go a couple different ways with this. So you can talk about one way that you're creative. So maybe you talk about your, guitar playing skills. Or you can actually choose a few different ways that you're creative, but maybe under the same umbrella. So maybe you play a few different instruments and you do a paragraph on guitar and a paragraph on piano and a paragraph on flute. Now, I know I said don't necessarily write about these common topics, but if that's what you got to write about, that's what you've got to write about. And by including 3 different things, you can give a little variety to your application. So for the UC3 greatest talent or skill prompt, a few recommendations. Number 1, I wouldn't necessarily recommend focusing on a quality that's already clear in your application. If you've got really solid grades, that shows your work ethic. You don't need to necessarily focus on hard working and that quality in your UC3 prompt, because that's going to be pretty redundant. Second, if you've got a quality that you want to show, say flexibility, don't just talk about the importance of flexibility in general. Show us how that flexibility manifests itself in your life. So for example, maybe you work a job and you want to talk about how your job has taught you to be really flexible. Or maybe in your home life, you've had to be really flexible, taking care of your siblings or whatever that looks like. Show me specifically with images or little story moments what flexibility looks like in your life. The third tip is, if you pick a sport for this prompt, for the greatest talent or skill, it can sometimes lead to a personal insight question that's kind of bland or basic. So if your greatest talent or skill, you say that it's volleyball, First of all, is that actually your greatest talent or skill? Like, you may be really good at it, but come on, like your greatest talent or skill? What I would say instead is like pick some aspect of it. Like I mentioned, for example, the quality being flexible. Like, could you show that quality through your participation in volleyball? So then your personal insight question is about that quality of flexibility. And oh, by the way, it manifests itself through volleyball. You tell us a little bit about that. And then maybe at the end, you give us a little bit about, oh, this flexibility has also manifested itself in my job or in this other place. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend focusing on a sport for this one. For the fourth one, like I said, you can choose between a significant educational opportunity or how you've overcome an educational barrier. Now, before you decide to commit 350 words and one of your 4 personal insight questions to this prompt, there's another section of the application called the additional comments section, which is basically the additional information section that you'll find in the Comment app. And what that is it's a 650 word space where you can basically put pretty much anything you want. So my question to you, before you write a whole personal insight question on whatever it is you want to describe, could you potentially write it in a pretty short, straightforward way and put that in your additional comments section? That way you don't have to waste one of your 4 opportunities by describing what that is, and you use more of your application. For the UC5, which is the most significant challenge you've faced, I've seen that some topics work better than others. So if you've experienced, for example, like really strong like family challenges, or you've experienced, sexism or racism, like those could potentially be interesting, compelling topics. I find this works less well. It's really hard to do well if you're writing about things like a bad grade you got in a class or like a romantic breakup. Like it's really, really hard to do that well. I've in fact never seen a breakup essay done well. If you've got one, put it in the comments below. I'd love to see it. But I feel like with the UC5, it's important to also, if you can, connect to that second part of the prompt, which is like how it's affected your academic achievement. So if you're thinking about writing for this one, ask yourself, did this affect my academic achievement? If so, maybe it's a good topic. If not, there are so many other options for this that you could choose. If you're considering writing about this one, ask yourself, could it be that writing about one of the other 7 prompts could more clearly connect back to those points of comprehensive review? And that's a really great question to ask about whatever topic you're considering, is like, is there a way to somehow connect it back to the points of comprehensive review? Could I score points essentially in one of those categories? Another quick tip is if you're considering writing about a challenge, you can use a simple 3-part structure, which is number 1, what was the challenge you faced? Keep that relatively short. Then get into what did you do about it? And 3, what did you learn? So 1/3 of your personal insight question, about 100, 120 words, is about the challenge. 100, 120 words on what you did about it, and 100, 120 words on how it impacted you, what you learned from the experience. The UC6 academic subject is one of my favorite prompts. Why? Because it gives you a chance to show your intellectual or academic side. Now, if you're applying for engineering or one of the sciences and you're applying to Berkeley, I would strongly recommend writing for this prompt because you really have to show them that you've got what it takes to do Berkeley level engineering. And oh, by the way, if you're applying as a transfer student, then you have to write for this one because they really want to know what is your focus now that you've spent a year, say, in community college or wherever else. For the UC7, which is on community service, this is again one of my favorite prompts. You can tell which ones are kind of my favorites because I feel like it gives you a chance to demonstrate how you've given back. Now, quick note that if you don't end up choosing the UC7, it's not the end of the world. You can probably show how you've given back, how you've done community service through one of the other prompts. For example, it could be that it's the way you've shown leadership, or it could be that something you've done that is a significant educational opportunity is also something that was community service related. So you can get some community service points by writing for one of the other prompts if you want. For the UC8, what else makes you stand out? This is kind of like the Common App's topic of your choice, but it's a kind of a hard one to do because most of the stuff that you want to write about can probably fit into one of the other 7 prompts. But my biggest advice on this is something I've already said to you twice, and I'm going to say it again. Whatever you choose to write about, make sure you're coming back to the points of comprehensive review. I slowed that down because you knew what I was going to say. Here are a few quick tips for assessing which of the topics is right for you. So one of the things you can do is what I call the buckets approach. And you can think of each of these prompts that you choose as kind of like a bucket for different sides of you. So let's say, for example, you've got the creative side, arts. Let's call that the UC2. you can pack in a few creative things that you do into that particular personal insight question. And let's say you've got your community service side. You could decide, okay, I'm going to write for the UC7 and I'm going to focus on this one particular opportunity, and that's going to show my community service side. Or maybe you decide you want to primarily show this one side of you, and then at the end you want to say, and that has helped me in these other areas, in these other community service projects. So you kind of do like a little combo. But then you go, okay, I've got my creative side here, I've got my community service side in here. What's missing? Oh, you know what? I do tons of sports and that's not really in there. So which of those other prompts could that go for? And as you're sussing through this, you can kind of go, okay, how do I get basically all the different sides of me? And again, I think it's a really good idea to go back to your UC activities list. And if you haven't created that, now is a great time to do it. So that by the end of their personal insight questions, they can see how these different sides of you are manifesting in the world. Part of the job of these personal insight questions is to help them connect the dots in your application, which brings me to the next tip. Think of these as kind of like a playlist that you're creating for your reader. So imagine you're creating a playlist on Spotify. Maybe you're doing like an old school CD. I don't even know if they have CDs, if you can even do that. But imagine that your first track, you got to start strong, right? If you want to get people dancing at the wedding or wherever, you got to start strong. So maybe that's the leadership one, or maybe you've got, strong creativity. That's a strong one. So you start with that. Then you segue into your second track, whatever your second topic is. And then, based on your preference, you want to put your weakest one third, or do you want to put that one second? And you got to finish strong, right? So think of each of these. Hopefully they're all strong tracks, because you really just got 4 tracks. But that's kind of a fun way to think about it. 2 other good questions to ask are, number 1, am I repeating myself? In other words, have I, checked the box firmly on like my sports involvement? Because maybe you've got sports on your activities list and you've even put something in your additional comments section. And now here you've written 2 essays, or 2 personal insight questions rather, on sports. It's like, you know what? I feel like they pretty much got that I play sports. So ask yourself, am I repeating myself? The second thing to ask yourself is, am I showing variety? Right? So yeah, maybe they've got your sports side and they've got your artistic side. Well, how could you bring some other thing that's going to be like, oh wow, here's a third thing that they've got? Maybe it's that academic side. Because I feel like rather than writing a second or third thing on the same topic, even writing like a weak personal insight question on another topic is going to demonstrate some other side to you. Another good one to ask is, have I worked in at least one of my activities to each of my personal insight questions? Because if not, it could be a sign to you that the way you've written about it is like too abstract or vague. Writing about activities is going to help ground and, like I said, give some visual representation of how you've manifested that quality, whatever it is, leadership, service, in the world. The last tip before we get into the step-by-step guide for each one of these is, are you connecting back to the points of comprehensive review? That's maybe the last time I'll say it, but maybe not. All right, so now let's get into a short step-by-step guide for writing each one of these prompts. If you're enjoying this content, I'll just say, hit me up with a quick like or a subscribe to get more videos. That tells YouTube that somebody out there likes me, which I sometimes wonder about. No, I'm playing. So the UC1 leadership, how do you write it? Like I said, it's a strong way to start your application, and I think the best way to brainstorm it is through something you've never heard about before. It's something I call the BEABIES exercise, and that's a silly name, I know, but it stands for the best extracurricular activity brainstorm I've ever seen. Why? Because you're probably writing about an extracurricular activity. So what is this BEABIES exercise? Take a look. So it's a simple chart, which you'll find below this video, and you'll walk through all of these columns. Should take you like 15, 20 minutes. Start with, what did you do? You can basically put in terms of like active verbs, what did you do? So if you're writing about, let's say, being involved in like, I don't know, a job that you had. Let's say you worked at, I worked at a video store, which by the way, you probably didn't work at a video store because video stores don't exist anymore. But let's say you worked a job at an ice cream store. So what did you do? You can put specifically, attended to customers' needs, managed the money at the end of the night. You put verbs to actually explain what you did. Problems I solved, organized the schedule, and you just list whatever all the problems were. Now, you might not think of like problems you solved related to a sport, but hey, think about, team dynamics. Were there any problems that you had to resolve there? Next column, lessons learned or skills I gained. You'll find a link below this video to something called the values exercise that'll help you think through what are some different lessons you learned or skills you gained. Impact I had. So what is the impact that you had on other people? If you did a fundraiser, how much money did you raise? If someone came up to you and was like, man, I feel like I understand physics now. Like that's an impact that you had. Or you could think about, what impact did it have on you? And then finally, how did you apply what you learned in other areas? So let's say, for example, I mentioned that earlier about flexibility. Let's say you gain more flexibility through this thing. How did you apply that elsewhere in your life? That could create some really interesting content. Next, you're going to want to decide on a structure. So you can either go narrative structure if you're talking about a challenge that you faced related to leadership, Or you could go montage structure, which is if you're not talking about a challenge. So if you are talking about a challenge, you do a narrative structure. Again, that 3-part structure of what was the challenge you faced, what did you do about it, what did you learn, like 1/3 for each one is gonna work really well. The other option, if you're writing a montage, is just to take your BEABIES exercise and flip it sideways, and you're basically gonna have an outline for your personal insight question, starting with what I did at the top, and then how I applied what I learned at the bottom. Pretty rad. Below this video, you'll find an awesome example from a student who took leadership in an unconventional way. He talked about a restaurant that he worked at with his family. In this example, there are a few things that I just want to point out. You'll notice that he sets it up in the intro. Here was the thing that I did, made it super clear. Second paragraph, he's using specific verbs. I've highlighted them in bold for you. Developed, taught, acquired, dialogue. So we really see what he did. Then in the third paragraph, he talks about what he's learned from that, how he's developed the empathy and vision of a leader. And then in the fourth paragraph, he talks about how he's applied those lessons beyond the walls of the restaurant. For example, he says, in school, you'll see me managing and organizing one-on-one mediations with peer counselors. Below this video, you can see the whole personal insight question and read my brief analysis. This is an amazing student from Mexico. He got into all the UCs that he applied to. For the UC2, the creativity personal insight question, first step is obviously you're gonna wanna choose a topic. But then I want you to step 2, ask yourself, what's everybody else going to be saying about this topic? If it's an uncommon topic, it's going to be easier to stand out. So if you're writing about like medieval blacksmithing, chances are you're going to stand out a little bit easier. But if you're writing about something really common, like let's say swimming, what is everybody going to say about swimming? They're going to talk about leadership, hard work, discipline, perseverance, right? So what I want you to do is I want you to brainstorm the cliche version of your personal insight question. And you can do this using the values exercise below this video. And then mentally, I want you to cross out those values and not write about those things. Then you have to brainstorm, what are some uncommon connections? So someone might not say about swimming, for example, this really taught me about the value of democracy, or swimming really taught me about, healthy boundaries, or swimming taught me about fill in the blank, right? And it's not easy to find these uncommon connections, but I believe these are key to standing out in this creativity personal insight question. Now, if you look at the example personal insight question for this one, which is on drumming, which is a somewhat uncommon topic, you'll notice that he's connecting to some uncommon values. So normally with drumming, we'd think hard work, perseverance, those kinds of things, but he connects it to freedom. He also connects it to technology and some other really cool things. You can check it out in the analysis, again, below this video. My advice for UC3, the greatest talent or skill personal insight question, is to, like I said, don't focus on some kind of sport and be like, I'm the best at this sport. Instead, choose a quality and then give us a sense of how that quality manifests itself in your life. So, like I said with the UC2, pick a topic, see if you can make some uncommon connections, or if you want, see if you can come up with a few different examples of how that quality manifests itself in your life, and then just create a simple outline. So take a look at this outline for the personal insight question below. Paragraph 1, she sets up her topic, which is basically the greatest talent or skill is finding connections among the dissimilar. And she gives the example in the first paragraph of how she was interested in games and puzzles as a kid. In the second paragraph, she talks about how her math and academic side developed in high school, but again, it's sort of underneath that theme of like finding connections among the dissimilar. Third paragraph, she develops other sides of herself and she finds computer science, which is like an aha moment for her. And then she wraps it up with how it all comes together. And again, below this video, you'll find an example with analysis, and I'll stop saying that because there are examples analysis for basically all of these. For the UC4, I just want to, again, remind you that you don't have to talk about significant educational opportunity and how you've overcome an educational barrier. Just pick one. And the advice that I'm going to give on this one is going to be kind of similar to what I've said to you already. So if you're writing about a significant educational opportunity, you can use that BEABIES exercise to essentially brainstorm all your content. And then again, you spend like 20 minutes doing that. You should have a lot to say. You just turn it sideways. And then if you're writing about the sort of challenges one, again, the challenge, what you did about it, and what you learned from the experience is going to be a great way to go. Now, I mentioned earlier that in some cases, you can think of these in sort of unconventional ways. So in the example below, you'll see a student who wrote about construction as a significant educational opportunity. And you wouldn't normally connect those, but he shows in his personal insight question how he learned a whole lot from it. So thus, a significant educational opportunity. For the UC5 on significant challenges, I'm going to ask you to do a specific exercise called the feelings and needs exercise. Now, it's going to take you maybe like 15, 20 minutes. If you want to pause the video as you do it and spend 25, that's great. In that exercise, I'm going to basically ask you 6 different questions, and I want you to spend some time thinking about each one. But by the end of it, you should have all the content you need in order to write your personal insight question. For the UC6 academic subject, I'd recommend going up and looking at that BEABIES exercise and essentially just put your subject in as the activity and then answering, what did you do? What did you do inside the classroom? What did you do outside the classroom to explore that subject? What did you learn? How did you apply what you learned elsewhere in life? You should have a bunch of content for that. Once you do, like I said, you can turn that sideways and you should have the pieces. If not, you could just pick what are the 3 to 6 chunks of your essay? So it's maybe like, oh, for me, history really came alive when I was a kid and this experience. And then later I leveled up with this other experience. But then really when I did this internship last year, that's when things were awesome. So maybe it's 3 chunks. The UC7 is basically the community service prompt. And there's a particular exercise that I think works super well for this. It's called the Elon Musk exercise. And the way it goes is basically this. First, I want you to identify a problem that you either faced or are currently facing related to your activity. So for example, let's say your community service project was all about recycling. It could be that the problem you faced is we didn't have recycling in our school, or here's why recycling is important on a global scale. Okay. So once you've identified what the problem is, then I'm going to say, go in there and raise the stakes. Tell us why this is such a big deal. Step 3, and this is kind of optional, is you can kind of envision another possibility. What if the world looked different? And maybe paint a little picture for that. Or you can skip that part. Step 4 is tell us what you did to solve this problem. Now, this is going to be the most important part. Give us the active steps that you took. Give us strong verbs to tell us, here's what I did. And then step 5, why were you essential to the success of this project? Maybe you were the numbers person who helped, figure out, maybe you were the treasurer and helped figure out, hey, are we going to be on budget? Or maybe you were the taskmaster, making sure to organize the spreadsheets and keeping everybody, on point, making sure that things happened on time. Once you've articulated specifically what your role was, then finally, what did you learn from this experience, or what impact did you have? You'll see an example of this below this video. I said I wasn't going to say that, and I totally did, but whatever. For the UC topic 8, which is what's the one thing that sets you apart, I'd recommend with your topic, if you're not writing about a challenge, go ahead and use that BEABIES exercise to brainstorm your content. If you're not sure what that is, or you skip to this part in the video, you'll find it below the video, or you can rewind. And then if you are writing about a challenge, I'd recommend trying that Elon Musk exercise, which I just talked about in the UC7. But most importantly, make sure that whatever you're choosing for the UC8, it comes back, this is the last time I'm going to say it, to one of those points of comprehensive review. Below this video, you'll find a link to my Pay What You Can course on the UCs. Again, it's pay what you can, so I'm not trying to sell you anything. It's literally $0. Just click $0 and you're good to go. It's got all the next steps. So once you've written your drafts, how do you then revise? How do you get feedback on the drafts? Who should you ask? How do you make sure each part of it is really showing the best parts of who you are? How do you show insight, which is one of the most crucial parts of this application process? And finally, how do you know that your UC PIQs are actually doing the job, doing the thing that you said you wanted to be doing? At collegeessayguide.com, you'll find a bunch more resources on everything from scholarship essays to resources for, all kinds of students, whether you identify as undocumented or LGBTQ or an artist or an athlete. If you've got any questions or things you'd like me to cover in future videos, just put it below in the comments section. And I wish you all the best in this process. See you soon.